Welcome to FileMaker Pro User Group, Dallas chapter. Good to have you for November 2025. I'm Taylor Sharpe. A few of us are back from the Full Access Conference a week or so ago in Los Altos, out in Silicon Valley area. That was an exciting conference. Ryan McKeon showed up at it, Rick Kalman, Clay Mackel. So we had a bunch of the Claris people there. And so they will be doing another one next year. They haven't given a date yet, but it will be coming back. Speaking of conferences, though, Ryan let us know that there will not be an Engage 2026. However, there will be an Engage 2027 or a conference in 2027. We don't know what it'll be called. It's going to return to what we typically thought of as the original DevCon. In fact, I'm hoping they'll go back to the name of DevCon because it's going to be a destination hotel. I like the old school stuff that we used to do when things were what I considered really exciting times. That will be probably spring of 2027. So mark that on your calendars. We hope to see all of you there. We have Matt and Paul from Harmonic Data are going to teach us about AI. So integrating FileMaker with local or private AI particularly. So local is very of interest to some of the on-prem people. So without further ado, Matt, Paul.
Thank you, Taylor. All right. In case you don't know, my name is Matthew Monroe, and along with my co-founder and friend, Steve Sikora, we started Harmonic Data back in 2004. Actually, we have been working together for almost 30 years, and one of the many things that we share in common is that we both have a passion for helping our customers vault over their technical hurdles by writing custom software that focuses on solving problems, not just merely on writing code. As such, one of our many tools in our arsenal has always been FileMaker Pro. Steve has been a FileMaker developer since 1989. And we have been Claris Platinum partners since 1999, actually well before it was called Platinum. So FileMaker is an important tool in our arsenal, but it has never been the only tool. In fact, I have kind of always been the web and integrations guy, and I'm not really a FileMaker guy at all, although I know quite enough to be dangerous. So to that end, I have brought Paul Mitchell with me.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. You'll be hearing more from me in a bit. I've been working with FileMaker since version 3, and I've been with Harmonic since 2016. It is great working with a team that shares my enthusiasm for building solutions that just work.
So what does it mean when we say we build solutions? It means that we are not a software-centric company. We're not even really a database-centric company, although we love databases. Our customers are all very intelligent people, oftentimes brilliant people, not necessarily technical, but they are absolutely subject matter experts in their fields. So a solution to them means putting the right data into the right hands at the right moment. So Harmonic is really a data company, not maybe even a harmonic data company. At the heart of all of our software design, scripting, procedural code, and yes, database schema is really quite simply a passion for getting data into the hands of the creative people that need it. Data enables our customers to do the remarkable things that they do. So that data is proprietary. It is their intellectual capital, and it is worth a fortune. It is protected by firewalls, VPNs, encryption, and sometimes millions of dollars worth of hardware. It is frequently subject to compliance regulations and sometimes even protected by federal statutes. So no, we do not ever just send our data to ChatGPT and ask it what it thinks about X. At least I hope not. So how do we leverage the benefits that large language models and AI bring to the table without compromising your company's data? Well, you stay local or private. It is possible to leverage the benefits of AI and LLM on consumer hardware or in private cloud settings. And that is what we're talking about. To start with, I'm going to give you a 1,000-foot view of where we are going to be talking about. First, I'm going to be introducing you to a customer of ours, ISS. Next, we will discuss the tactics. What are the pieces in play for the solution that we're building for ISS? I will be talking about model hosting, where your data is, both text and vision models. I will be talking about RAG hosting, chatting with your documents, the guardrails, the searching, the criteria. FileMaker 2025 features that make life easy. And then to show you the results to back everything up that we have shared here, I will be adding a final in closing section here. So we're going to be moving swiftly, but with intention today. And before we get started with the rest of our presentation, we need to talk about what the content is and is not going to be. The content is going to be practical. We are not going to talk about theoretical concepts. The internet is already full of talking heads pontificating on what the age of AI will look like in just a few months. I personally really don't have a lot of time for many of the scare tactics and speculation that make for all of this clickbait. My hope is that you can take this information that we give you here and immediately put it to use, either in your own research or in your own attempts to integrate your internal systems with a local or private LLM. These are methods and technologies that we are actively using right now, developing for our customers in parallel with developing this content. There are many, many right ways to do these things. We are not attempting to be exhaustive. In many cases, we didn't even pick the absolute best way to do some things, but instead we went with the options available to us at the time and for the purposes that we chose for our project. This is not a how-to. It's not a workshop. Think of it as a practical guide over the main points of what we are trying to do, how we succeeded and failed at doing it, using hardware and software technology that is available to consumers, all without shipping our data onto public services or AI providers. So at every major point, we will be skimming across the surface of multiple very deep pools. Some of these concepts, along with the underlying technologies, are in fact studies of decades. Again, we are choosing here a practical approach versus an exhaustive approach. So we are at a very interesting inflection point in this evolution of this industry. There are a lot of super complicated tools and processes that have been simplified way down and automated into tools that can be understood by folks who are not data scientists. Before we get too far down the rabbit hole, I want to give you the key takeaway from all of our months of research and learning. As complicated and as this underlying technology can be, you will spend probably more than 90% of your time collecting, preparing, formatting, and testing your data. It doesn't mean that learning some of this new tech won't stretch your brain. It certainly will. But it just means that at the end of the day, a lot of time will be spent with your data or your metadata and documents. Now, let's introduce you to our client, Independent Support Services.
So who is ISS? Matt said we were using these techniques and concepts with actual clients, so let me give you some background into one of our favorite clients. Independent Support Services is a company that serves individuals in the state of New York with developmental disabilities. These people are participants in a program called Self-Direction. In this program, an individual is able to make their own path by living at home or in the community and receiving services and supports customized to their own needs and vision. Self-direction is a win-win for the state and also for the individual being served. The program is designed to cost the state less than institutionalized care while providing the individual with a much more personalized and integrated experience. ISS serves as a leading fiscal intermediary for the self-direction program. In simple terms, being a fiscal intermediary means that ISS pays the expenses on behalf of the participant and then bills the payee, either Medicaid, the state, or the managed care insurance program. Now, if you were listening, you may have noticed that I just outlined a system that has PII, PHI, PFI, federal and state compliance laws, and a host of regulations. It is hardly possible for these folks to print out so much as a blank spreadsheet without needing approval from a compliance officer. The irony is, a powerful large language model such as what's offered by Anthropic or OpenAI would be a formidable tool to help them navigate the labyrinthine compliance landscape if it weren't specifically disallowed by those very same regulations. So what do we do? How do we proceed? I know you've already jumped ahead to the answer, local and or private LLM. But how?
Let's cover the pieces in play. In our series of projects, we are trying to pinpoint and then prompt local or private models so that they can be used to help our customer interact with their systems and their document faster, using natural language queries, and with their data available to it, enabling the model to keep an eye on the compliance and regulation vagaries that slow the productivity of the average ISS employee and can threaten their ability to get reimbursed from New York State self-direction program, and we hope will also inform them how to properly report on compliance documentation. The challenges for these goals are the terrain that we have to work with. Where is their current data? Where are their documents? What resources do we have in terms of model hosting? The options? Local model hosting for on-prem data, private on-demand hosting for cloud data. The bottom line is that ISS has multiple complex workflows and data spread out over multiple on-prem and cloud-based systems. Installing just one LLM on a server somewhere is not going to be sufficient. So we need to look at their total landscape of all of these various terrains and form an exhaustive and nimble battle plan. For our customer, here are the various bits of terrain that we're dealing with. On-prem data, as much as they would love to flip a switch and end paper, they still have legacy customers and vendors that utilize paper. That gets sent to their office. They have documents that get sent to them via email. They have forms that get filled out for induction reasons. They have compliance information that is locked up deep inside ADMs and contracts. This all must be input into the system, and manually duplicating data is not an option anymore. This is not the 1990s. AWS data. So that said, many of their customers and support staff and vendors do utilize their website portal. To keep that portal online 24/7, 365, except for occasionally in North Virginia, ISS turned to AWS, with which they signed a BAA for hosting many of their VMs, services, and documents. They also have a robust FileMaker solution. In these two spaces, they have data spread across FileMaker systems, SQL-based databases, S3 buckets, NAS document storage, and all of this is utilizing web and FileMaker and Clara Studio-based GUIs and workflows. The point is, building LLM-based solutions for this multifaceted system was not going to be a one-size-fits-all, double-click affair. So what does this solution currently look like? So far, we've identified 3 primary use cases, which require 3 different terrains. A multimodal model for hosting, for parsing complex invoice documents. We would like to utilize a RAG platform for a documentation help chatbot tool. And augmenting their existing FileMaker systems by introducing some of the new FileMaker AI enhancements. But before diving into these 3 different use cases and their terrains and challenges, I want to pull some of our terminology and existing workflows into focus so that we are all on the same page. We're going to be using the terminology of local LLM versus private LLM throughout this presentation. We are also contrasting these terms with the notion of public LLM, such as with OpenAI or Anthropic or Grok. So when we say local LLM, we mean that your data is sent to models hosted on software such as LM Studio or Llama CPP or Ollama on hardware that you own and maintain, such that your data doesn't leave your on-premises infrastructure. And this way, the privacy of your data can be absolute, at least as absolute as your firewall, network security, and budget can make it. We realize that this is kind of a gold standard for many organizations, but we also realize that this isn't always financially or technically feasible. When we refer to private LLM, we mean that your data is sent to models hosted on Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure AI Foundry, where you have an established BAA agreement or some similar agreement, such that that data does leave your on-prem infrastructure, but in a secure fashion, and you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. We realize that this is not always possible. However, the notion of entering into an agreement that provides for data privacy with the 2 entities above is not really new. Many organizations have already moved their email, document storage, database hosting, website hosting into their cloud platforms. So utilizing one of the LLM services may not be as far-fetched as it sounds. And public models. When we refer to public LLM, we mean those corporations that produce their own models intended for general use and public consumption. So simply stated, no, you should not put PHI, PFI, that kind of thing into ChatGPT. OpenAI, in fact, explicitly prohibits this, and doing so violates HIPAA, PCI DSS, and OpenAI's terms. So to solve our terrain puzzle, we had to take a look at these aspects of a workflow. Where is the data located now? Where are the documents located? And there are millions of them. Where is the end user located? Where is the LLM model needed for a given use case located? We've stated in many of our previous iterations of this presentation that it is more likely that your budget and timeline has more to do with which route you go than which model tool platform is empirically the best at a given use case. This is the reality in this case. Your mileage will vary, and your location of your data, documents, people, and desired models will drive the landscape of this terrain. The bottom line is that to build affordable LLM-based solutions for ISS that augment and improve existing workflows, not merely create new ones, that solve acute substantive problems that they are having, we have proposed the previously explained 3 solutions for them. So let's walk through and explain each one. Multimodal model hosting. I even wrote it out slow so I wouldn't mess it up. That's impressive. All right. ISS gets a ton of receipts, invoices, statements, documentation for compliance, timesheets, multitudes of reimbursement forms. This ranges anywhere from a pre-printed form filled out by Adobe to handwritten reimbursement forms to restaurant receipts just mailed in an envelope to timesheets filled out using a pencil and photographed with an iPhone in landscape mode in poor light with a coffee cup stain on it. This is an actual redacted example of some of the digital images they get. We spent some time feeding some of the worst examples into several different visual models, from Quinn 3 VL to Llama 3.2 Vision to Amazon Nova. We were very pleased with the results, as they were able to read and interpret much faster and with much more precision than a person could. In fact, these models are vastly improved over where visual models were just a year ago. However, in picking specific model, we need to consider where the documents and their current users and workflows are located. Certainly, if you are hosting models on your own hardware, you are not limited to the catalog of available models of a service provider. Does this mean unlimited access to all models? Not all models are publicly available. Not all models are open source. Not all open source models are free of licensing entanglements. Not to mention that at the end of the day, you can only host that which sure amount of available RAM and disk space allow you to host. This option, however, hosting things locally, clearly offers you the most flexibility at the expense of your own hardware. Choosing a cloud service provider frees you from the cost of hardware, but limits you to the contents of the model catalog. AWS Bedrock has over 100 models to choose from. Azure claims to have 1,700 plus models, and I have not counted them. Regardless, you can always upload your favorite model to an S3 bucket and point Bedrock to it, and you can use your own uploaded model. One important caveat to note in this scenario, however, is that the time needed to spin up a larger model like the newer Quinn 3 is not insignificant, and for us, it was a deal breaker. Finally, an important thing to note for the FileMaker crowd is that FileMaker Pro's new AI script steps expect only OpenAI compatible endpoints. So if you are hosting your own LLMs, you need to pick a service that uses these endpoints, like LM Studio or Llama CPP if you're hosting locally. If you want to use out-of-the-box FileMaker calls. So of course, with the ever malleable FileMaker, you can always roll your own calls via insert from URL. Now, both AWS Bedrock and Azure AI Foundry claim to offer OpenAI compatible endpoints. However, this only applies to a subset of the models in their catalog. So this issue is going to come up again in just a little bit, so stay tuned. Yes, you can host your own LLM models on-prem with consumer, prosumer, even affordable enterprise hardware. Much of our own testing is done on our own Mac Studio M3 Ultra. While not cheap, it does save us the per token expense of relentlessly testing model after model. The two options that we're going to highlight here are the Apple Mac Studio M3 Ultra or the M4 Max. And for the Intel side of the room, we are fond of 08 Simple Store X14 NVMe. Not only does this particular piece of hardware make a super fast FileMaker server, but when you drop a GPU in there, we think it will make a formidable LLM server as well. So this is probably a good time to do a little bit of promo work.
So speaking of 08 Simple Store product, 08 President Mike Lynette is in the room with us today, and he'll be back next month as our main presenter. You can talk with him after this presentation, not during. Talk with him after this presentation, and certainly don't miss his team's full presentation on December 5th, right here at this table. Details coming soon on the website.
Many organizations that live in tight compliance spaces turn to Microsoft or AWS or even Google to manage such things as email service, document storage, or messaging or directory management. In the case of ISS, looking into AWS Bedrock was a natural place to turn since most of the documents and data for this specific workflow already live in AWS land. We knew that spinning up some AI-driven workflow enhancements was going to be a big lift for them, and we did not relish the idea of telling them that our new feature would also require 10,000 plus hardware expenditure. We needed to roll this out rapidly and iteratively. ISS was already relying on AWS's security and compliance with their BAA agreement, so this seemed like a natural choice. As an aside, from a developer point of view, with AWS Bedrock, being able to pivot from model to model to model was quite nice without the weight of re-downloading, rehosting, quantizing, etc. Interestingly enough, while we were inclined to go in the direction of Qwen 3, AWS doesn't offer that model, though they do allow you to upload the model to an S3 bucket and access it that way. However, this introduces more latency than we liked, and it takes almost a minute to spin up. This led us to play with the various Amazon Nova multi-model models, which have proven to be excellent for the purpose we outlined earlier. So, as stated before, FileMaker Pro script steps use OpenAI endpoints. Bedrock offers limited model with the OpenAI endpoints. So how do we use native FileMaker Pro script steps with our model of choice, Amazon Nova Premier? To get us over this hurdle, one of our developers, Anthony, decided to build an endpoint conversion tool we call OTAB, OpenAI to AWS Bedrock, using Go. So, here, I will demonstrate hitting a custom endpoint, running our OTAB endpoint conversion tool, allowing me to utilize the generate response from model script step against a model for which there is no OpenAI compatible endpoint. So here I'm going to show that this will be pointed at a custom endpoint located here in our facility. This is where the OTAB service is running. Here, I'm going to show that we will indeed be using the generate response from model script step, and that I will be utilizing a model within Amazon Bedrock service. All right, so let's ask this a question. Okay, so what you can see is that we sent our OTAB tool a query using OpenAI endpoints, and we got a response from a service that doesn't understand those endpoints. We think this is pretty nifty, and we wonder if this would make for a useful tool to put on maybe the Claire's Marketplace. Let us know what you think. Also, as an aside, we spent an enormous amount of time ripping out this awesome 3-field demo file, but I think part of the point here is that integrating with some of these things is actually incredibly simple. Quite a lot of water has gone under the bridge since we began on this journey with ISS. Here is one tale that we think demonstrates just how much water. We completed a project not too long ago in which we created textract adapters for some of the more common forms that ISS has to process. This allowed ISS to rapidly speed up the time it takes to process paper and image-based documentation. Where textract shines is when a document has clear field labels, consistent uniform columnar data. Where it really kind of falls down on the job is when the data isn't organized well, has awkward summary rows, and where the data points aren't clearly defined by field labels. So, is it possible to challenge textract's fine-tuned models with beefy, cutting-edge multimodal models with a little bit of fancy prompting? Okay, so here we have an example of a mileage reimbursement form filled out by hand. That was particularly difficult for a person to read quickly. When we sent this document to textract, having previously trained it on this particular form, we were able to pull quite a lot of data from it, which Amazon textract put into a helpful JSON format for us. We can take that JSON data, insert it into a UI tool we built, and show it to a processor, allowing them to fill in the gaps quickly and get that document queued for payment. But what do we do with a mileage reimbursement form that is formatted differently? What do we do with a reimbursement form that textract has never seen before? This is maybe where multimodal model plus prompting can really shine. All right. In this demo, I will be submitting an invoice to a general purpose AWS Bedrock multimodal model. This model has not been trained to read this invoice. Can it read into the document and pull valuable information from it? So as you can see, some of the data is not in a labeled format. There is nothing to tell the reader nor the model what these blocks of data represent. You can also see that the rows are kind of awkwardly represented here with no clear headers as to where the row begins. You can also see that the number of data points per row varies from row to row. Furthermore, at the bottom there, we're summarizing the document, but that summary row isn't really staying within the columnar format. And finally, at the very bottom, you can see that this particular invoice has not been signed. So we're going to upload that form. And let's load this document into our tool and submit a question about the document to the Bedrock multimodal model. Who is the primary contact in this invoice? Keep in mind, there's no field label on the invoice that says primary contact. It doesn't take long to answer, so is it correct? Let's investigate. Let's zoom in, and we will see that yes, Maxine Ellis is the primary contact, and we will also see that this information was not explicitly filled out. So next question. Has this invoice been properly signed? Again, pretty quick answer. And as discussed before, we know that it hasn't been signed, and so the model got this right. All right, so yay that the model can answer these questions, but this is not really practical. Let's try to get this model to summarize all of the data that it sees and put it into a format that a FileMaker solution can work with. Please extract the data from this invoice as JSON. Only give me JSON. Please separate start and end times into separate data points and calculate the duration. All right, so what we are seeing here is that this model has read the entire document. It has already decided on a consistent field label for that data. It knows that some of the rows have more details than others. It does the math for the duration for us. And at the bottom, it even correctly summarizes the data for us. There we go. Pretty smart.
I need to get an applause light for the theater or something.
Pretty smart. I wish we had time to show even more of our model prompting specifically, but you can start to dial in exactly what you want field labels to be, and you can dial in exactly what data points you want. You can even, with your prompt, start to train it where to go find some of these data points if it sees data but can't identify what the purpose is. We need to jump though. Utilizing a RAG platform. Enough about multimodal model, let's talk RAG. So with many things, FileMaker has made creating and managing a RAG a very easy and simple thing to do. So for this next demo, we are going to use a FileMaker file we created to help automate these such things. So we're like sending and receiving queries, loading certain models, and in this case, embedding models necessary for loading documents in the RAG and for displaying the answers. We are actually going to use the All-Mini LM L12 V2 embedding model from Sentence Transformers. The model we are using to handle these queries is GPT OSS 20B, hosted locally here by an application called LM Studio. So no WAN calls, no internet calls, no data leaves the local area network. This demo is going to show just how easy it is to start working with a local LLM talking to a FileMaker hosted RAG. First thing we need to do is locate a document that contains accurate and well-formed data that is relevant for ISS's industry. Now, before uploading it, let's start by asking, via a FileMaker window, a local LLM that has been instructed only to consult with provided documents as context, a question specific to information covered in the yet to be uploaded document. Does OTPS clothing have a dollar cap? If so, what is it? It has no idea yet. So, all right, Let's now upload that document to the RAG server, which contains, buried amongst a lot of other data, the answer to that question. It is going to import that PDF and create a vector embedding for that document. No additional preparation of data was necessary in this instance. Let's re-ask that same question. Now that it has been provided with this document, it can do the vector math and it can find the specific answer. And at the bottom, look, it is even showing you the receipts. I think that's pretty cool. I would say boom, mic drop. Awesome. So the first thing you probably noticed is how easy it is to train a RAG. The second thing I want to call your attention to is how easy it is to untrain a RAG. No longer knows. The third thing to note is that it is very easy for a RAG to provide context for its answers. And finally, I'd like to point out, Claris with their FileMaker tools for adding RAG to your enterprise are kind of out in front of their peers in terms of ease of use and approachability. Okay, so theoretically, what if your documents were not already in FileMaker, but in S3 bucket or buckets? What if there were millions of them? What if you needed multiple layers of granular control over who could see which documents or how those documents are categorized? Perhaps you'd like to tag certain documents for certain reasons, or maybe limit the scope of the documents to be searched based on creation date, modification date, or any other customizable attribute. Let me show you how we are looking to solve this use case. In this demo, I'm going to demonstrate how the Amazon Knowledge Base service can take documents stored in an S3 bucket, convert that data into vector embeddings, and then make that content available to an AWS Bedrock model. Now, let's first take you to my S3 bucket I have already set up. You can see that it already has a dozen or so administrative memorandums in it. These are the documents that ISS relies on for guidance as to how to comply with the New York State Self-Direction Program. Let's take a look at one of those documents. I kind of want to point out that this document appears to come from the OPWDD, and it is directed at providers and brokers. We will be referring to these terms here in just a little bit. Let's show you how this applies to the Amazon Bedrock Knowledge Base. This is the console where you can create and maintain knowledge bases. When you create a new knowledge base, you can, of course, give it a name. You can aim it at an IAM account for managing security, and you can point it to a given S3 bucket. So I'm going to show you from our knowledge base, from our existing knowledge base. You can see that it is aimed at the S3 bucket I showed you earlier. You can also see that this knowledge base has a unique ARN that we will use to point a Bedrock model at. Next, I'm going to show you that we will be using our OTab endpoint conversion tool. I'm showing you that we will indeed be pointing our query at a model hosted by Bedrock. That is our tool. Run knowledge base script. Very simple script. And it's got Bedrock ARN aimed. That's the model that we're sending in. So let's send a query to our Amazon Bedrock model that it would only know if it were consulting the knowledge bases that we previously created. What is OPWDD? I don't actually know. So it doesn't take long to respond, and the response contains the source material it used to answer the question. All right, let's ask it another question. Within the context of New York State Self-Direction Program, what is a provider? Again, a little bit longer to chew on that. It pulls the answer from provided documentation. In fact, it's using the same document we were just looking at. Okay, now let's ask it a super generic question though, and let's not provide any context in the prompt. What is a broker? Super generic. Could mean 20 different things depending on what industry we're aiming that at. But we actually get a very context-specific answer based on the documentation that we uploaded. And it shows us the receipts. Pretty cool. So that was a glimpse into how we set up and are looking to roll out the tools of local and private LLM and local and private RAG servers. At the end of the day, as complicated as it seems to be to set up and utilize these tools, they are just that, tools. The question remains, how do we best use these models? How do we get the local or private LLM to interact with and integrate with our internal FileMaker data and workflows? There's a lot of good answers to this question thanks to the smart folks at Claris. In our opinion, the FileMaker platform offers us not only some of the best ways to glue all of this together, but now, as of 2025, one of the easiest ways. I'm going to pass things to Paul, who is a FileMaker developer, to introduce you to the FileMaker side of our solution.
Thank you, Matt. So for 40 years now, Claris International has had a single mission: to make powerful technologies available to everyone. And they've done this by developing and improving the Claris FileMaker platform again and again. My own career working with FileMaker spans 4 different decades and 6 different employers, and I've worked with this platform as they've added relational database capabilities, web publishing abilities, ODBC connectivity, improved container storage, the web viewer, which allows FileMaker to work with web technologies like JavaScript, also JSON features, SQL queries, API integrations, cloud hosting, scores of new calculation functions and script steps, and now, in the second decade of the 21st century, AI. Truly making powerful technologies available to everyone. Each of these additions to the feature set started small and then grew, and the new AI features are no different. Just this past May, Matt and I presented to this audience about using the Perform Semantic Find script step, which was new in FileMaker 2024, to find a set of records with vector-embedded files using both public and local private LLMs based on the semantic meaning of the query rather than an exact text match. You can see a video of that presentation on our website. We were asked to present that same material again to a new audience, and then in July, Claris released FileMaker 2025. And we knew that we couldn't just show last year's technology. So we put a great deal of work into this new presentation, not just Matt and I, but a team of 8 other people, to show you what we're working on for a real client in a real work environment to solve real-world problems, possibly very like real-world problems that some of you are being asked to solve. And today, after presenting to audiences on both coasts, we've brought our new presentation home to Dallas. Now, I'm not a cutting-edge guy. I'm not a computer whiz polymath with expertise in multiple disciplines and technologies. I'm a FileMaker guy. So I brought Matt along to set the stage, explain all about hosting, multimodal, and RAG models, and all that higher-level stuff that he just told you. He's taken us into the wild blue yonder that's now within our reach, and now it's my job to bring us in for a safe landing on the familiar airstrip that is FileMaker Pro. So we're going to start with our old friend FileMaker Server. I'm sure everyone in this room knows FileMaker Server is the software that makes your database files and solutions available in local or wide area networks or over the internet. But in 2025, FileMaker Server now also hosts text generation models, text and image embedding models, RAG models, and much more. When you cannot or just don't want to share your vital business data with Google or Elon, you can host your own AI models on FileMaker Server. Now we're going to look at a couple of the new AI script commands in FileMaker. First, I want to show you what is possibly my favorite new script step, Perform Find by Natural Language. If, like me, you have users who sometimes have difficulty doing complex finds in FileMaker, this could be a game changer. So let's say we just want to find anyone in the table named Kenneth. So like a normal find, this step is context dependent. Like any normal find, it's only going to find based on the table underlying the current layout. And we find 5 records. Let's take a look at the find criteria it used. It searched in both the first and last name fields. So let's get a little more specific. How about Kenneth enrolled in 2015? Now we're doing a slightly more complex find, including a range of dates. And it finds the right 2. Let's look again at that find criteria. Just what you would have done. But how long would it take you to explain to a user how to do this? Let's try one more thing. Anybody here named Ty? She's not here. And it simply does the right thing. These new steps are allowing our users to simply talk to the database. It gives new meaning to the old phrase, querying the data. So let's take a look at the scripts that are doing this. So the perform find by natural language step is here. Its arguments are stored in global fields and variables. There's a drop down to choose among 3 results. It can simply give you a found set of records, or it can return the found set as JSON, or it can even just return the find criteria as JSON. I have it returning just the found set, then I'm doing a little error trapping and logging here. But I've also used a prompt template to modify the model's response to my query. The configure prompt template step is where we can get into some serious prompt engineering. So almost all of this text is default with the step when you select find. I've only added the final 11th point, giving some extra instruction on how to find a range of dates. I recently spent an hour with a client who's very smart about people and the tasks her company does, but not so much about databases. I spent most of that time teaching her how to do advanced complex finds. She took copious notes. But what if we could just use this step to just do the right thing for her? Like I said, I think this is a real game changer. But did you ever get a question like, how can I find for XYZ? And the answer requires you to build some new fields or relationships to be able to do it. What if we could empower the user to just do a find that we haven't even built the schema to support? The perform SQL query by natural language step allows us to do this. We'll put in a request to find records in a different context based on a count of related records. To do this the normal way, I'd need a calculated field based on a related table, which doesn't exist in this example. So we're asking to see brokers with fewer than 5 participants. Notice we're on the participants table, but we want to look at brokers. Now, of course, a SQL query doesn't usually affect your found set. It returns an array of values that match the query, but in this case, it grinds and it grinds. It changes the context and finds the right found set. How did we do that? Let's take a look. So here's the script step. Again, arguments are stored in global fields and variables. And again, we have an action dropdown to specify what the step actually returns. In this case, we have the script step specifying to get the SQL query itself and not the response to the query. A simple calculation parses out the context for the data, and we store that in a variable. Then we use another variable to actually execute the query and get that the model returned and get the list of records that match the query. And finally, we use the new go to list of records step that Taylor presented to us on to take us to the right layout and the right found set. So again, we've used the prompt template to do some engineering on the prompt to improve the quality of our response. Eric Clark discovered that we could get a better result by instructing the model to limit the query to only use the tables that are needed. Prior to that, he sometimes saw the model incorporating tables that it didn't need. We also instructed to return the internal record ID rather than the primary key, so we can use the go to list of records step. Finally, you can see the actual query that the model returned, and the array of values that match the query. It's very straightforward. So you can see how Claris is empowering us to empower our users to do things we haven't even thought of yet. So what does that look like when we pull all of this together? To answer that, I'm going to pass the presentation back to Matt.
Putting us all together. So before we close, I'd like to give you a glimpse of where we are headed in our project for ISS. Remember, we are in the middle of ironing all of this out. Maybe the end of the middle now. And many of these integrations that we were hoping to demonstrate were not quite ready for prime time when we put this demo together. We did, however, get many things to work, and we're hoping that this will whet your appetite for what is possible. Back to our friend Kelly. What if we were to give our local LLM something extra tough to chew on? How well does it perform when asking it to use actual real-world data against information and rules found in the ADM documentation? So, for this demo, we will be communicating with a locally hosted AI model, GPT-OSS-20B. Also note that for this demo, we have preloaded all of the current ADM documentation that we have been given that applies to this program. Let's give the RAG some context and then ask it the following. I am a self-direction broker. First, remind me how billing works. Then answer me this question. Today, I worked for participant Owen Ellis from 2040 to 1327, and for participant Luca Rask from 1405 to 1430, and then from 1450 to 1456. I'm charging Owen $40 an hour. I'm charging Luca $43.85 an hour. How much money did I make? This is going to require the local LLM to do some actual math. But not only that, it will require the LLM to know and leverage billing rules contained within the ADM documentation, specifically billing rules that apply to SD brokers. So let's see what happens. Note that even though that this LLM is local, it will have to chew on this for a bit. And we have an answer. Let's see what it found. First, we see that we get a detailed overview of how billing works. Then it walks through how to calculate the earnings per participant, showing us this math. It also describes how the rules come into play, reminding us that we can only bill in 15-minute increments, and so 2 of those minutes are not billable. I think that's pretty cool. All right. If you're a FileMaker developer, imagine how these tools and these new workflows can impact a customer like ISS. How does this affect, say, training a new employee? How does this impact the time it takes to inspect compliance documentation? How will this impact the hardworking departments that struggle to keep up with all this paperwork? Maybe ISS could now go further with the staff they already have. So if you are struggling to seize upon the opportunity the LLM brings to the table because of privacy, security concerns, let us encourage you to explore the world of local and private LLMs. We think that this could be a game changer for you, and we would like to help. And this landscape is changing every single day. In fact, from presentation to presentation to presentation. It is difficult to keep up with. This is our 4th iteration. We have sunk hours into understanding what we have shared here with you today, and we feel like that we have our minds just barely wrapped around this. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, please talk to us. We would be happy to save you some headaches as you start integrating these new features.
This presentation would not have been possible without the support and help of key individuals at Harmonic, as well as the general support of our whole team.
We used actual intelligence to build this presentation and demos. I did not feed any of my text into OpenAI or anything. So thank you to our team, and thank you for FMPUG for hosting us and allowing us to present to you today.
Thanks for joining us.
Happy to take questions.
That was in one of your slides, one of the last slides, just the bottom of your results, you had where it found the information, but it was more than just like this document. It was like this section of this document. I'm curious how you did that, because did you split the document and then reference it that way? Or do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
So Eric was the one that actually fed FileMaker that document. And I think
each document was its own PDF file.
Yeah.
And then he, in the prompt, directed them to specify what page of the document did you find in there, what section.
Yeah. But that was the FileMaker version. That was not the knowledge-based version that did that. Yeah.
Jean pointed out that we should probably publicly state that Owen and Maxine are fictional personas that we use to help
That's right.
explain things for ISS. They're characters that we made up to help for documentation and those sorts of purposes.
Oh yeah, that is a very good point.
We did not violate HIPAA.
We wash all of our demos multiple times, and even with that, still this morning we had to scramble to replace a slide at the last minute because, my goodness, it happens. But we're super careful about it, and as our client, and that's why That's why we're talking local and private instead of public models.
Something that it's not a question, but it should be a question that people knew to ask. So can we explain a little bit about the endpoint conversion again? So some of the experience that we've had with AWS Bedrock and how different models behave in an environment like that, and what we need to do to use it with FileMaker AI calls.
Right. So FileMaker has kind of, for the moment, centered around the open AI completions, which means that when it talks to a given service, it really wants to see what /v1/chat/completions or whatever that spelling is, and it needs that. It also relies on the JSON structure to send and receive to interpret where to pull the answers from. So, all right, what if we want to use OLLAMA? That does not use OpenAI completions out of the box. You can, of course, install OpenWebUI and that kind of thing, but that also adds a layer in between that has its own issues. I don't like the fact that it's 97 Docker containers that get launched. It's kind of a mess. So what do you do when you're talking to a service that uses different embeddings? And in fact, Bedrock uses its own embeddings. Microsoft AI Foundry uses its own custom embeddings. So how do you talk to it? Well, either you learn what the completion needs to read, the part of the URL after the FQDN, and you learn what does my payload need to look like in terms of the JSON format, and what payload will I be receiving back as a response, and kind of roll your own, which FileMaker allows you to do. You just won't be able to utilize the built-in script steps that FileMaker built that do a lot of nifty things. I mean, I just wish we could dive into it. But so the idea is we put a tool in between there that literally just gets the endpoint from FileMaker, converts it to the destination endpoint that it needs, and converts the payload sending and receiving so that the FileMaker user doesn't realize they're talking to something that is talking in a different language almost.
And one of the things that we learned with OTAB and preparing for this presentation was that, the conversion we need to do for Model A with Bedrock is not the same as the conversion we need to do for Model B with Bedrock.
Yeah.
So that was a this week discovery, in fact.
It was. And I would even say that there's even a slight delta between I want to talk to Bedrock versus I want to talk to Bedrock pointed at a knowledge base arm. There are some subtleties there. Until we standardize and get on the same page, it's just going to be a food fight. And so the OTAB was our quick way to do it because, quite frankly, I don't want to pay my FileMaker developers to rebuild the neat things that these built-in script steps do. It's just, they do too many neat things.
I have a question. First of all, I have to say, having seen a few of these, I see significant advancements in what you're sharing, and I enjoyed that. But what I want to know is really on behalf of other developers who don't share office space with you, how can they take advantage of your months and hundreds of hours of experimentation, research, and now your wealth of knowledge as they enter into this unknown field of AI?
That is a great question. I'd say right now, based on the fact that I am not plugged into some of the FileMaker resources that I should be plugged into, going to our website, grabbing my email address or hitting the contact button and let me know what kind of troubles you've got. Same thing with Paul. We love talking about it. We've been kind of heads down this year. I don't like talking about myself. So I don't have this is Matt's website, go here, here's all my thoughts. So,
but you would not be opposed to contact from other developers who are inquiring for direction.
Not at all. And I've even sent people in this room emails like, how the heck are you doing this? And so this is one of the things that is great about the FileMaker community is the developer base and the community of developers. They kind of like talking about successes, and you know what? We actually kind of like talking about the things that went boom too, because they frequently make for a more interesting tale. So I would just like to say, as an open invitation to the folks in the room, as we delineated local versus private versus public, I think that the concerns about local versus public are well trodden, and I'm on the same page with a lot of people. We discourage heavily in this company using any of our customer data at all in any environment that looks like it could be connected to a public model, because we don't want the blowback from our customers. And in fact, we would have some pretty monstrous lawyer gorillas come after us if we slipped up in that regard. So we're pretty judicious about it. However, we also note that with our certain customers, private LLM, private models is an option. If there are well thought through arguments for why private models are a bad idea, I would like to have that information. I have some of it, but if you have more, I would really like to have that information, because we are trying to make good decisions. I for the life of me, cannot figure out if a company is using SharePoint on Office 365, why they wouldn't use Azure AI. Honestly, don't know. Seriously, don't know. If someone has a reason why, slip me an email and tell me and show me the receipts. I'd like to read that, because I'm not trying to be a skeptic of that, but it is a concern.
I actually go the even more liberal way. I hear a lot of people using OpenAI and ChatGPT interchangeably, but they're not the same thing.
Excellent point.
And when you're sending information to the API for OpenAI and the other models, if you do the research and like that, they're not training on that data. That is not going anywhere into other things like that you have to worry about. You are sending over the public internet with HTTPS secure calls the same way you're sending it to something like AWS or whatever. So I have less concerns than a lot of people have about using an OpenAI model or something like that, because of what they've been third-party verified that they are not training on that data, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I just want to put that out there. Just because it's OpenAI doesn't mean it's the same thing as ChatGPT. Now, if you are using ChatGPT in your office work and you're putting in personally identifiable information into that, you are absolutely sending that out to be trained on.
Yeah, very good points, and that is well stated. And I would say for us and for a lot of folks, the concerns and for all this kind of stuff kind of lag are kind of out in front of some of the compliance, right? So some of our customers, just simply from a compliance standpoint, are just not going to be allowed to interact with OpenAI endpoints, regardless of whether they use a ChatGPT interface. And it'll take some time maybe for that to come around. And then we do have the concern matrix, which is just, I heard this, I heard that, and that is what it is. And of course the news will always stir the pot, and you almost have to wait for that to finish, because when that settles, we'll learn this allegation actually wasn't true or was worse than we thought. So yeah, it's complicated.
Mike with 08 had just a couple comments on angles that they're going to be taking the next month when they talk to us.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So our presentation is going to be completely the opposite direction. We're networking and hardware and how to accelerate your FileMaker on Intel platforms for your Intel server and Intel network. So it's going to be pretty interesting. We're going to probably be doing some testing on your equipment, your software, on our hardware soon. And it's going to be pretty interesting next 60 days.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. All right. There is a QR code that is about to go on this.
So that leads you to a Clara Studio survey talking about how well did you like this presentation. Please fill it out and give us your feedback.
We would very much like to hear that feedback. Please throw your opinion into the ring. We are very interested in making the topics we give it at PUG directly applicable and usable. So, all right. Thanks, guys.
And lunch is served. If you're online, next time come in person and join us for lunch.